Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Ancient Awakening. It is time for this month's episode of Ancient Awakening, and we are connecting to the spiritual implications of Orpheus and Eurydice, the story of Orpheus. I felt this inspiration to connect to what the spiritual implications of Orpheus would be when I was, trying to understand a little bit about us as humanity, that when it comes to something that we love, when it comes to something that matters to us, do we always trust that it's following us to the next destination? Do we always trust that it's with us all the time? Do we as humanity trust our partners, our friends, the people that we love? Is there a time where we feel like we need validation, that we need to constantly be checking if everything is going exactly according to plan? This is kind of how humanity is. This is kind of how I am, how a lot of people are, is that seeking validation to confirm what we already know, maybe not trusting that everything is going with the flow of the universe that matches our soul. This specific idea in my mind, because I thought about it with certain things in my life. And then I started thinking about Orpheus and Eurydice. That this has to be, because I'm trying to find what will this month be about. And it came to me in this moment of thinking, when I love something, when something matters to me, do I trust that it's going to follow me to my next destination? Do I trust that it's going to stay with me, that it's going to stick with me? Well, in mythology, there is quite literally a story about that. The thing is Orpheus loves more than one thing. He loves Eurydice, he loves music. His romantic love matters a bit more. This is the interesting part. To me, are we hardwired to prioritize romantic love above all things? Is this part of the soul? Or is Eurydice more of a metaphor for something else? That's what I wanted to uncover. So that is what we're going to dive into. I'll pull the artwork, the pictures, everything, and tell the story and the spiritual implications of Orpheus and Eurydice. And what I encourage you to do while you're watching and listening and understanding the deeper implications of this mythos is to reflect on your own life and see, are there certain things that you're afraid, will it follow me? Will it stick with me? Is it meant for me? Are there certain things that you constantly need to validate that it's there, even though deep down you know that it is? And why must you seek this validation? That's the big question I was posing to myself with Orpheus when I'm trying to figure out the spiritual implication is, why does he need to seek validation? What is calling him to do so? And in this, do we have trust issues with the divine? Do we have trust issues with ourselves? And why, as humanity, do we struggle to trust so much? This and more we will understand in a few moments with the spiritual implications of Orpheus and Eurydice.
Orpheus was a legendary musician whose music could move animals, trees, and even stones. He fell deeply in love with Eurydice, and they soon married. But unfortunately, after that, she died from a snake bite. Devastated, Orpheus decided to descend into the underworld to bring her back. Using his music, he softened the heart of Hades, who agreed to let Eurydice return to the world of the living on one condition. Orpheus must walk ahead and not look back at her until they both reached the surface. As they ascended, Eurydice followed behind him in silence. Near the exit, doubt and fear overwhelmed Orpheus, and unable to bear the uncertainty, he turned back to look at her, breaking the one condition of the king of the underworld. In that instant, Eurydice was pulled back into the underworld forever. Orpheus, shattered by his second loss of his beloved, wandered the earth in grief, playing sorrowful music until he eventually met a tragic end himself. This is the brief summary of the story of Orpheus and Eurydice, but we are going to dive further into this and to the implications of the deep details of this story. So first, I want to understand Eurydice as a character, because this is his inspiration. This is the inspiration for the whole story. Orpheus, who can find the beauty in everything and make music at a heartbeat, he fell in love with this woman. And what does she represent symbolically? What is the depth of Eurydice? Eurydice is often remembered only as Orpheus's wife, a silent figure who dies, then follows him out of the underworld and disappears the moment he looks at her. But when we look closely at this story, Eurydice is far more than a passive character. Actually, she is a nymph, and tied to nature and intuition, and the liminal space between worlds. In some traditions, she is a dryad, a spirit of the trees. In others, she is the daughter of Apollo himself, which ties her to prophecy, clarity, and light. Her name itself means wide justice, broad judgment, or she who shows herself amply. This etymology is not just accidental, it is actually a theme in Greek mythology, where Greek myth often encodes spiritual meaning in the names of its characters and archetypes. Eurydice's name suggests she is not simply a bride, she is a mirror, a revealer of truth. She is a feminine force connected to the underworld's justice, echoing Persephone's role as the queen who governs balance between life and death. As in a lot of interpretations, Persephone is also the one who encourages Hades to allow Orpheus to bring Eurydice back to the land of the living, because she is equally inspired by their love story. Her death is not random. In the oldest versions, Eurydice is pursued by Aristes, a shepherd who becomes infatuated with her beauty. As she flees, she steps on a viper and dies. This moment is symbolic in the old version because she dies from running away from violation. She was unwantedly pursued by this masculine force that tried to claim her, and her death is the result of intrusion, a disruption of her autonomy. In some versions, her death is part of a cosmic consequence. The nymphs demand recompense for her loss, and Orestes' bees die as payment. Eurydice's death ripples outward, affecting nature itself. This reinforces her identity as a nature spirit whose fate is tied to the balance of the world. See, Eurydice is almost entirely silent in the myth. In Virgil's version, she speaks no words. In Ovid's version, she speaks only one, vale, farewell. The silence is symbolic. Eurydice represents the inner feminine voice that trauma suppresses, the intuition that becomes quiet when fear dominates, the emotional truth buried beneath grief, the softness that disappears when life becomes harsh, and the part of the psyche that cannot speak when wounded. Her silence is the psychological reality of what happens when the feminine principles within us is injured, when intuition becomes faint, when emotional clarity becomes distant and the inner voice becomes quiet. She is a part of the trauma that we bury within ourselves, that the feminine buries within us. She carries divine feminine trauma. She is a archetype for divine femininity, and when we go through traumas of being pursued unwantedly or losing our love as well, because she lost Orpheus just as he lost her, there is a pain, there is a suffering, an unknowing situation that will come after, and we are consumed by love, we are guided by love. She is the wounded feminine self, symbolically. The aspect of the soul that represents the intuition, receptivity, emotional truth, softness, vulnerability, inner knowing, the ability to feel love. When she dies, it symbolizes the moment that the feminine self is wounded. She can be connected symbolically to the most traumatic parts of us, to our emotional body, to the humanity's emotional body, to the story of love and what happens when a woman experiences heartbreak and loss. It is the feminine wound, the loss of the inner softness. She is the softness for Orpheus. She is his softness, his light, his inspiration, his emotion, his love, his truth. And when she dies, he is disconnected from his light. When he goes to retrieve her, it is not just to save a lover. He's trying to reclaim a part of himself that trauma buried. When she died, he lost his softness, because the divine feminine gives the divine masculine the softness that they need to see the beauty in all things. In the underworld, she is not angry or resentful or vengeful. She is waiting. She follows Orpheus silently. She trusts him completely. She is present even though she does not speak. She is near. This is the reality of the wounded feminine. It is within us. It wants to return to us. It is the inner child. It is the wounded self. It is our innocence. It is the wounded innocence. She represents the innocence. And it cannot lead, and it cannot speak, and it cannot force. But when you are ready to listen, it is there. When you are ready to lead, it is there. It is with you in every way. The shadowed feminine, the shadowed innocence, the part of the psyche that lives in the subconscious waiting for integration. She's the emotional truth that follows you when you cannot hear it. She's the intuition that walks behind you even when you doubt it. She's the softness that remains even when you forget it. And when Orpheus returns, Eurydice is pulled, when Orpheus returns to her, when he sees her, he returns to a part of himself that leaves the underworld without her. He sees her, but accepts to leave without his innocence. This is interesting. When she is pulled back into the underworld, she does not blame him, she simply slips away. Maybe the maturity that comes from letting go of the soft innocence is important, but the difference is what Orpheus becomes after. It's a devastating situation when you think about it. When doubt becomes stronger than trust, the intuitive self retreats. The intuitive self is connected to our innocence because when we intuitively trust things, we're not using the distortion of egoic logic. We are following the inspiration of the soul. So when fear becomes louder than intuition, our inner voice disappears, our ability to connect to our highest self. She could be representative of the highest self. The highest self is more connected to divine femininity in a sense. In a sense, both divine masculinity is also there. She carries divine masculinity in a sense. She has a protective energy. She is behind Orpheus the whole way. Eurydice's second loss is the symbolic collapse of principles that we hold true, spiritual principles of divine feminine and masculinity, when are overwhelmed by fear, fall apart. Principles of the intuition, the higher self. It is the moment where the soul loses its softness because the mind cannot tolerate uncertainty. Eurydice carries a few different archetypes within her. The lost inner voice, the intuition you stop hearing when fear takes over, the wounded feminine, the emotional truth buried by trauma, the silent companion, the part of you that follows your healing journey even when you cannot feel it, the shadow self, the aspect of your psyche that lives in the subconscious waiting to be retrieved, the unseen presence, the emotional reality that exists when you doubt it, and the test of trust, even when you doubt it. The emotional reality that exists even when you doubt it, the unseen presence. I want to circle back to that, and then we'll go back to the last one. The unseen presence, the emotional reality that exists even when you doubt it. You know what exists even when we doubt it? Source, Creator, God, our spirit team, our guardian angels, our departed loved ones. There's so many things that exist that we cannot see, and we sometimes doubt are there. Even our highest self, our good conscience, our inner child, our innocence, our naivety. There are so many parts of us that we do not see that we doubt might still be in there. The goodness, who we were as children. And to reclaim that is to see it and acknowledge it and, really decide, do I want to carry this with me? Or do I want to let it go? Do I want to set it free? And in a sense, Orpheus set Eurydice free. Even though it was fear and it was doubt that made him look back. In a sense, it set her free. Because he acknowledged that she was there. Even though he knew that she was there, he did have a moment of doubt that made him verify if she was there. And when he saw that she was there, she left. This is an interesting part as well. Because sometimes the things that are following us, that are haunting us, just want to be acknowledged. And then they might leave us be. Also interesting. The final archetype. Because this I wanted to mention, that it also could be symbolic of this as well. something following us that we need to let go of, but we just haven't truly acknowledged it, so we have to pay attention to it in order to let it go. Okay, now to the final archetype. The test of trust. The path and the part of you that walks the path that can only return if you walk forward without looking back. There are things that require trust, and there are things we must acknowledge, and I think that she can represent both Eurydices. It just depends on your story. She carries a lot of implications within her character, within who she is. And I feel like this intense clearing of energy when I reflect upon her, because she is the quiet intuition you must trust without proof. This is the highest self. She follows Orpheus silently, the same way your highest self is silently with you. Emotional truth that lives in the subconscious, her home becomes the underworld, and our emotional truth lives in the shadows. The feminine self retreats when doubt dominates. The feminine self, the divine feminine, carries a spiritual trust. The divine masculine carries an earthly trust. She disappears when Orpheus turns. And your inner voice can disappear when fear wins, but I do like the interpretation that it is something that must be acknowledged in order to be let go of as well. Because maybe we must acknowledge that we're afraid in order to overcome fear. Healing requires leading the lost part of you out of the shadow. The lost parts of you out of the shadow. Orpheus must walk ahead. Your conscious self must lead your subconscious healing. The divine divinity within, divine feminine or masculine or whatever it may be, cannot rise if you keep looking back. Eurydice cannot ascend out of the underworld into the land of the living, again, if Orpheus doubts. Your intuition cannot ascend if you cling to old patterns. However, maybe there is the interpretation that Eurydice's ascension is just to accept that she is no longer existing in the land of the living anymore, and that Orpheus set her free by acknowledging and accepting that she is part of the land of the dead. There is also this perspective that I am starting to like more and more, that almost he needed to do this for his grieving process. And as we're wrapping up Eurydice's symbolism in that sense, I want to go to the implications of this being a story of grief and going through the stages of grief, how Orpheus represents this process. Let's wrap up Eurydice with this final thing here, that the soul loses its softness when the mind demands certainty. Her second death is the collapse of trust, and your emotional truth collapses when you demand proof. There are some things that you cannot find reason for, and that is okay, because when it comes from the soul, sometimes the mind cannot make sense of it. So Eurydice is the soul's feminine half, and Orpheus is the masculine half in a sense, but they also carry the balance within each other. They balance each other out. She's the part that feels, receives, reveals, and is connected to intuition. She's the emotional truth that trauma buries, the intuition that fear silences, the softness that grief hides, and the inner voice that doubts erase. Orpheus's journey is a journey to reclaim his truth, his healing. It is a journey of healing, of processing grief. When people retell the story of Orpheus and Eurydice, they often focus on the romance, the tragedy, and the moment of doubt. But beneath that lies a psychological truth so precise that it actually mirrors the stages of grief perfectly, in a spiritual, emotional, mythical sense. Orpheus's journey is not just a descent into the underworld, it's a descent into the human psyche as it tries to survive loss. Grief begins with shock, the moment reality fractures. With Eurydice's sudden death, that is the rupture in Orpheus. His world collapses. This is the moment the soul is bitten. The moment something poisonous enters the psyche. His descent into the underworld is not simply a heroic act. It is the stage of denial. The refusal to accept what has happened to his beloved. He cannot imagine a world without her. So he goes to the only place where she still exists. The realm of memory, shadow, and longing. See, the underworld itself symbolizes the stage of bargaining. Orpheus plays his lyre not to entertain the king and queen of the underworld, but to negotiate with fate. His music is an emotional plea every grieving person knows. Please, please, give me one more chance, one more moment with them. Give them one more breath of life to share with me. His bargain with Hades is the mythical version of the human attempt to rewrite reality, so desperate to undo the loss of the one that they love. But the ascent, the silent climb back towards the living world, is the stage of anxiety. The fragile hope that maybe the impossible is happening. This is the stage where grief becomes fear. Orpheus cannot hear Eurydice behind him, and silence becomes unbearable. Silence becomes suspicious. And he follows his suspicions, and it becomes doubt, and it is the moment where the grieving mind whispers, what if I'm wrong? What if I can't sense their spirit? What if they're not still with me? What if they're not still in my heart? What if they're really gone? What if I really am walking alone? Because here's the thing. When someone dies, we have this comforting feeling that their spirit is still with us. But what if we're wrong? What if they're not there? What if they haven't been guiding us this whole time? What if we are really alone? And the ones that we love are really lost? And that's when the turn comes. A lot of people see this as a failure, as a weakness, or a lack of faith, or his love in Eurydice not being strong. But I beg to differ. This is the psychological moment of acceptance, the moment he realizes the truth he has been running from. When he looks back, he is not sabotaging a miracle, he is confronting reality. She is dead. He is acknowledging the loss he could not bear to face before. The turn is the moment denial collapses and grief becomes real. She disappears instantly. Not because the gods are cruel, but because that was the test. He finally realizes that she's gone. He reaches that acceptance so he can try to move on, even though he's not able to do so very well. See, the turn is the moment he stops bargaining with fate, the moment he stops pretending, stops hoping for the impossible, and accepts the death. And acceptance in grief is not relief, it is a collapse. He actually hits depression. That is his final descent. He does not turn to rage. He does not beg. He does not go back to Hades. He does not try again. He wanders. He becomes a ghost among the living. It took him too long to reach the acceptance. He held on to the hope that he could change his reality so much that he forgot to be living in it. His music becomes mournful, fragmented, and hollow like his soul. This is the stage of depression that comes after acceptance, where the soul withdraws from the world because the world no longer feels real, because this person, this loved one that is lost, was his anchoring in his reality. So if we tether our entire life and anchoring of our reality to one person, do we lose that when they are gone? Orpheus's wandering is the emotional numbness that follows acceptance. It is the moment where the psyche stops fighting and simply grieves. His songs become the expression of a heart that has finally understood the permanence of loss. He is not punished. He is grieving. And his tragic end, torn apart by the Medeans, is the final stage. Surrender. Not to death, but to truth, that grief transforms the soul. In some versions, his head continues to sing, even after death, floating down the river, still calling Eurydice's name. This symbolizes the final stage of grief, the integration of loss into identity. The grief does not disappear, it becomes part of him. Orpheus's story is not a warning about doubt necessarily. It can be a map of grief, a mythic representation of how the human soul breaks, descends, bargains, fears, accepts, collapses, and transforms in the end. In the end, he is returned to the one that he loves in the underworld, joining her as a spirit like her. Orpheus's doubt is not weakness. I don't think so. I see it as an acceptance. When he turns, he is acknowledging reality. I cannot pretend anymore. I cannot walk forward blindly. I cannot believe she's behind me when I cannot feel her. This is the moment grief becomes truth. Truth is the moment healing begins. This is why the myth is so powerful. It shows that acceptance often looks like a collapse. It shows that doubt is some way the doorway to clarity, because he cannot have false hope. It's not about doubt, it's about false hope that prevents acceptance. It shows that the soul must break in order to transform. Orpheus does not lose Eurydice because he doubts. He loses her because he finally understands that she is gone. And that understanding is the beginning of his spiritual transformation. Now, lastly, I wanted to cover three main things that jumped out to me from this story. And it's Eurydice as a character, the story of Orpheus with grief, and then their love story in general and what that represents. So let's really understand the spiritual implications of their love story as Orpheus and Eurydice. The relationship between Orpheus and Eurydice is often framed as a tragic romance, but myth rarely speaks only of romance. Their bond is not simply a love story, but a psychological union, spiritual polarity, and symbolic map of how the masculine and feminine principles within the psyche interact, how they wound each other, heal each other, and ultimately separate when fear becomes stronger than trust. Their relationship is the meeting point of two archetypes. Orpheus is the active, expressive, outward moving force, while Eurydice is the receptive, intuitive, inward moving force. Together they form a symbolic whole, the union of action and intuition, sound and silence, consciousness and subconscious. Their love is not merely emotional, it is metaphysical. It represents the delicate balance between the part of us that moves forward and the part of us that follows quietly, trusting the path even when unseen. Orpheus represents the conscious mind, the part of us that acts, decides, creates, expresses, and seeks. And his music is the voice of consciousness, trying to make sense of the world and the world around him. Eurydice represents the subconscious, the part of us that feels intuitive. It remembers, it holds emotional truth, it is behind us, following us, and our motivation. Their relationship symbolizes the internal bond between the part of you that leads and follows, speaks and listens, knows and senses. When she dies, there is a part of consciousness that is lost, and this allows access to the subconscious. When Orpheus descends, it is consciousness trying to reconnect with what was lost. When they ascend together, this is consciousness trusting the subconscious. It must trust the subconscious, it must trust the higher self, even when it cannot see it. This is why the condition is so symbolic. He must not look back. He must trust what follows him. He must trust the influence of his soul, his highest self, and the subconscious that knows what the conscious is not ready to process. This is the spiritual requirement of inner alignment. The conscious mind must trust the subconscious without demanding proof. This is the essence of inner trust. Now, Orpheus's music is sound. It is expressive, emotional, outward. Eurydice doesn't really speak. She is silent. She is just receptive and inward and subtle. Their relationship is the union of expression and intuition, voice and quiet, action and stillness, masculine and feminine, conscious and subconscious. When Orpheus plays, Eurydice listens. When he leads, she follows. When he doubts, she disappears. It is an interesting dynamic, a dance between the parts of us that move and the parts of us that feel. Their relationship teaches that silence is not absence, it is presence without noise. Eurydice's silence behind Orpheus is the silence of intuition, the silence of emotional truth, the silence of the subconscious that follows even when unseen, because you must really quiet the mind, quiet the ego, in order to hear the highest self. In order to hear your intuition, you must quiet doubt. So in order for him to truly hear and sense her presence, he had to silence the voice of doubt. That is the only reason why he couldn't hear that she was there. Now this symbolism that she represents the highest self and he is the humanity trying to reconnect. And we do sometimes fail in our ascension journey. It's not a failure, but it is a setback. And he experienced this setback. See, Orpheus could not tolerate silence, the uncertainty, the not knowing, so he turned. This is the moment consciousness tries to control intuition, the moment the mind demands proof from the heart, and when the mind demands proof, the heart retreats. When Orpheus turns, the union collapses, because the bond between consciousness and subconscious breaks when fear becomes stronger than trust. This separation symbolizes the collapse of inner harmony, the loss of intuitive connection, the fragmentation of the psyche, the moment trauma overrides trust, the moment doubt dissolves alignment. Eurydice's disappearance is the disappearance of the inner feminine, the loss of emotional truth, softness, intuition, and inner voice. Orpheus's grief afterwards is the grief of a psyche that has lost its balance. He becomes a wandering consciousness without its subconscious counterpart. He becomes sound without the beautiful silence that makes us appreciate the music. He becomes action without the intuition that inspires the action. He becomes expression without the feelings that allow us to express. His music becomes mournful because it is the sound of a half, of a grieving half. In mythic symbolism, Orpheus and Eurydice are not simply lovers. They are spiritual contract. Their bonds represent the agreement between the inner masculine and the inner feminine, the conscious and subconscious, right? So their contract teaches that the subconscious will follow the conscious if the conscious leads with trust. The feminine will rise if the masculine does not demand. The inner voice will return if the mind does not turn back in fear. The emotional truth will ascend if the conscious self walks forward with faith. The condition do not look back is the contract itself. It is the requirement for inner alignment. When Orpheus breaks this, she retreats. When the feminine retreats, the masculine collapses. We must have both. It is the balance of the divine masculine and the divine feminine within. They must support each other instead of attacking each other. And the only language that is left when there is disharmony is grief. So, Orpheus and Eurydice together represent the entire healing journey. Eurydice's death is the wound, the thing that must be healed. Orpheus's descent into the underworld is the confrontation with trauma. This is the first step towards healing. Then the bargaining. This is the hope for restoration, the hope that maybe we can just make it all go away and we don't have to face the pain. The ascent is the integration process that, we're getting he got what he wanted in the sense that he was bargaining to try to not to have to deal with the grief of losing Eurydice. So he's going to take her with him back into the land of the living. Now, this is the ascent back to the land of the living. It's an integration process of taking a part of you with you, but it's also, I would say, a part of that deny of healing where it's like, I'm going to take everything with me, I'm going to take all of it with me without actually healing it. I'm going to carry the wound, but I'm not going to heal it, I'm not going to address it. There's also this aspect as well. See, the turn is the collapse of trust in the healing process, in a sense, but also, again, I can see it as addressing what he was avoiding so that he can heal it. The disappearance, the loss of inner alignment, yes, but can I challenge my own thoughts and say that what also is happening here is he's accepted that she's dead, and that's why he then, the wandering, the depression, he goes into grief. Now, when you can get stuck in grief like Orpheus, and that ultimately led to his death, or you can turn that pain into power and have the rebirth of consciousness. I don't see this as a tragedy. This is their love story is how the psyche breaks and how it tries to heal, truly. And the relationship between Orpheus and Eurydice teaches one final truth, that love is not tested in moments of passion, it is tested in moments of silence. I do like this symbolism of their story. That is when you can really see, like, when it's not so loud in your face, are you able to still trust your love? See, Orpheus fails, not because he doesn't love her, but he can't tolerate the silence. Does that mean he doesn't love her? I don't think so. I think that it is him getting lost in passion, and so it's not divine love. It is love, but it's not divine love, because divine love can tolerate the silence. It is love that is led more egoically. So that is why it leads to suffering. Because it's not coming from the soul. Because the soul does not doubt its love. Love requires trust when you cannot see it. It requires faith in what follows you quietly, surrender to the unseen, and walking forward without proof. Their story is the mythic embodiment of the truth that love collapses when fear demands certainty. Their relationship is the story of how doubt destroys miracles. Here's the thing. This story of Orpheus and Eurydice carries so much spiritual symbolism. And this is just the big three, but I can interpret it in so many different ways. The important factor is that in the spiritual journey, when we doubt our abilities and our spirit team and our guardian angels, when we doubt our faith, when we lose faith, we lose a part of ourselves, because faith is in our nature. Eurydice was a part of Orpheus, and he lost her because he lost faith. And the only way to get back to her is to have faith. So, for this month ahead, as you are awakening your ancient wisdom, keep faith, keep trusting, and know that even with some detours, you are still on the right path. And what loves you will never leave you. Thank you for joining me for this month's episode of Ancient Awakening and uncovering the ancient wisdom left for us in the story of Orpheus and Eurydice. I will see you all next month for the next installment of uncovering the spiritual implications of Greek mythology and Ancient Awakening. Let me know in the comments below how you feel about the Orpheus and Eurydice story and what myth you want me to uncover next.